Welcome. This is June 14th, 2019. Uh, People on this call are gluttons for punishment and want to walk through the backlog of Cluster API to try and assign priorities and get stuff rolling. Let me share my screen here. All right, so last time, in our last fun-filled episode of Grooming the Backlog, we had walked through a certain set of issues. Hopefully this is up to date, Andy, your document.
I haven't touched it since we had our last call.
All right. So let's paste this document here in the CAPI channel for those who care. All right. So I will just take a quick gander. It might be that we've already worked down to the middle.
Oh, yeah, that one's been closed. Sorry.
Right. So last I recall, we were inside of the clarification one. Provider plugins for Cluster Cuddle. I said I was going to walk through Cluster Cuddle. Cluster Cuddle phases, one-shot deployment. If this is also Cluster Cuddle. I'm gonna take a separate pass through on all Cluster Cuddle stuff, asynchronous to this after we get through other things. Set a bootstrap cluster, defaults by default, also Cluster Cuddle. Document cluster client functions.
That would also fall under Cluster Cuddle as well, because the cluster client's only used in Cluster Cuddle.
Is a good way to integrate Cluster API with Terraform. Triage support. Thoughts here? I know you took a look at it originally, Jason.
I think it's resolved.
It doesn't look like there's anything actionable for the Cluster API repository itself. Like this is, should somebody consider writing a provider that shells out to Terraform? Sure, go for it.
I agree. I think that we could make a comment that this would be an excellent instance of an infrastructure provider, a la the bootstrapping proposal, but it doesn't need to be tracked within this repository. And then my thoughts about using Terraform is that it's not the greatest programmatic way to solve this problem, but it is super fast and super hacky, and it works sometimes. So no reason to discourage people.
All right, so pro tip for when we're doing triage, if you talk the most, you are the one that gets to close it and put the comment in.
Fair deal.
All right. Boom. Enable configuring Docker for a machine? I would say straight up nope. That's outside of the scope of Cluster API. Yeah, I'm going to say no. Thoughts?
Sounds good to me.
Any dissenters? Last chance.
This will probably go into the bootstrap provider, I think.
No, image stamping.
Yeah, image stamp.
Or if you had a bare image that you used for just enough operating system to spin up a server, then something that SSH is in after it's been booted could do it.
Yeah, I still, I actually put a comment on Vince's proposal to say that, like, post, you should see it later on, Andy, is that the complicated tapestry of software provisioning should not be in scope inside of Cluster API. We should enable, yeah. Bang, one less. Image stamping utility. We can close this one now. There's a separate PR. We should link to it, to community. 1 second here. Okay, it's enhancements. Pull requests. Build.
The third one.
All right. Enable IBM Power blah blah for cluster API.
So I think this one can probably actually be closed because I think we have an issue for tracking CI support for it.
You want to close this one?
Yep.
Jason, 852. Use group control customize instead of customize. Row.
Did that get reverted? Or is customize still a subcommand of control?
It still is.
It still is.
Okay.
Are you talking about the drama thread?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. I didn't know the end result of that.
I think we should assign somebody to this to figure out what to do here. I don't have strong opinions yet. I think somebody should take this on. I think it is worthwhile to address because yanking in customize is a depth graph of doom.
The one thing I would say is if QBuilder hasn't gone that route, we may not want to go that route either because we heavily leverage some of the scaffolding and stuff from QBuilder itself.
I still think we should evaluate it and talk with QBuilder folks because like just by yanking in customize alone, so like the Google folks have cribbed out a separate library for just doing the patch semantics that customize supports and have a separate tool for that. And I believe the customize folks are even moving, they're actually moving the code to make it more vendorable in that fashion. I think investigating and talking with them to make sure that we're not yanking in that ridiculous dependency tree is a worthwhile endeavor.
I don't think we vendor customize, if that's what you're talking about.
Pretty sure we vendor it, yeah.
We do. That's the last I checked, I thought.
Okay, I'm not seeing it, but maybe I'm looking in the wrong place.
It's vendored in something. It might. Yeah. Okay. I'll double check or want to double check.
Why don't we assign somebody to this one who wants to take this, and then we can just, if it's not a problem anymore, we can close it out. If it is, we can investigate. I think this is worthwhile. Or nobody, anybody? All right. So part of being on a triage call, is not to just hang around. Is to say like, yo, we need to chop wood and carry water. I'll jump on that hand grenade.
All right, I'll do it.
Yeah. You have two now.
Two? All right, so another thing while everybody's in the call here, if you want to sway or have influence in the project, the more commits you have, the more work you do, the more wood you chop, the more water you carry, the better your influence capabilities are in the project. So if you don't chop the wood, if you don't carry the water, don't expect to have much sway in some of the decision makings that kind of occur.
Tim, I can take this one because I remember I had this issue with the customize when I tried to follow the book. It was kind of pain in the neck. So yeah, I can take this.
Why don't we unassign Andy because he's got other things to do?
Thank you.
And why don't you work with Vince, Pablo? Can I assign you? What's your handle?
You have to join the Kubernetes org.
All right, so let me CC you. What's your handle, Pablo?
First name, last name. Is there? Second one.
Okay, so I'm going to ask that you do the same thing that Michael needs to do. So go to the Kubernetes org and maybe we should have a link in the main doc. Somebody want to open an issue to have a new contributor doc to Cluster API, por favor? Can somebody open an issue, please?
I think
Yeah,
I
that.
already do.
Yeah, but do we have the Kubernetes org as part of that list?
I'll double check.
Okay. Well, while he's checking, you need to go to the Kubernetes org, Pablo, and hit new issue. And then there's organization and membership request. You need to get a membership to Kubernetes SIGs as the org.
Okay.
Is it in the new contributor doc, Vince?
It's not. I'll file an issue.
Now.
All right. So once you remember the org, you're CC'd on the issue. Please work with Vince to get it rolling. All right. Configurable timeout kube config ready. For deploying a different release of Kubernetes, the default timeout is 20 minutes, may not be enough in waiting for cluster ready. That's fair. If you're doing software provisioning, which I recommend, I could imagine this taking a long time, especially if you're using a separate weird bootstrap sequence. Does anyone want to take this one? That seems like a fair.
I can take it.
I would say this is long-term important. What do other people think? I'm swagging. I saw Vince say thumbs up.
So this one is directly related to cluster cuddle. So I think definitely long term.
Yeah, kind of related to cluster cuddle.
No, it is because that's the only place where the timeouts exist today. At least as far as common code.
Oh. There's got to be timeouts for the other component. Okay, I need to dig. I'm gonna assign myself not to do the work, but to, I'm curious now. IBM Cloud Provider HA process flow.
Yeah, there's some things in here about, like, if we want to do, if somebody wants to do HA, there might need to be some changes to some of the cluster cuddle flow, maybe.
I'm going to assign myself to this. I'm going to take all the cluster cuddle ones, but change the description.
You can also add area cluster cuddle. I think we have the label now.
Ooh, you added it?
Yep.
Sweet. So if you see something that's cluster cuddle, just assign me and add area cluster cuddle. And I'll do the triage separately for this stuff. Unless people are super jazzed about cluster cuddle, I'm kind of falling on a grenade there because if you're super interested and want to come along with me on a journey into Wonderland, just let me know. Unable to delete a machine.
We talked about that one last time.
All right. So punting. Don't abort cluster creation when applying add-on fails. Is this also a cluster cuddle one?
You're in the wrong tab.
Oops, sorry.
But yes, it is a cluster cuddle one. The problem is I don't know if there's consensus on whether or not it should be an error like it is today, or if it should be a warning.
What does it mean deploying add-ons?
So
Like,
there's an add-ons YAML, which is where today most providers deploy the CNI provider.
And DNS too, yeah?
DNS is part of, what's it called? DNS
No.
Kubernetes handles that.
Kubernetes. But this is part of cluster cuddle then again, because there's no constraints in kubeadm that say your add-ons have to be in this order.
Yep.
Is it blocking? Is cluster cuddle avoiding the creation, or is there something inside of the orchestration? Because it
Cluster
should be
cuddle's
after everything.
applying it.
This might be like a good like flag maybe.
So I want to like reduce. I want to actually have like a document that we think about cluster cuddle in a comprehensive fashion. What is your purpose to pass butter? Simplify configuration. Wait.
My gut feeling on this one is no.
I feel the
Yeah,
opposite.
this
So this
feels
is
like-
Go ahead, Jason.
I was going to say, to me, this feels like a layer above cluster cuddle or cluster API, because this is more like opinionated cluster management and deployment.
So I have a different opinion. I feel like this is purely a cluster cuddle question. One of the reasons that cluster cuddle is annoying to me is this exact thing, the fact that we have 3 different manifests. I mean, the only thing that cluster cuddle does for me that kube control doesn't is the pivot. And I feel like passing cluster cuddle a list of manifests in a single file or a directory with different files should be sufficient. We don't need 3 arguments for that.
Yeah, I think I missed that this was specifically for cluster cuddle. So I'll leave that to Tim to figure out. I think the argument is pretty sound, but I would be against trying to have some simplified thing that is just that you could kube control apply.
Yeah, so I agree with what David said. I don't agree with this like simplified cluster definition that's in the description.
Right.
Is this cluster cuddle though? He's talking about like an overall.
No, it's for cluster cuddle.
All right. All right. Use random name for bootstrap cluster. Also me. Wow, I'm getting the fun ones. Add Go context to actuator methods. That actually seems legit. This is already V1 Alpha 2 long-term important, or?
So the problem is this is specifically to the actuator interface, and for at least the machines, so far the proposal that we're looking at eliminates the actuator interface for machines. And we've also talked about potentially even eliminating the actuator interface for the cluster as well, potentially for V1 Alpha 2.
Yeah, I know Pablo had expressed some interest in trying to put together a proposal that would get rid of the cluster actuator and follow the model that we're trying to do with separate controllers for machines, but do it for clusters. Whether it gets into V1 Alpha 2, I don't know, but if it can, that'd be awesome.
Do you want to help on this one, Pablo?
We have another issue about moving the provider spec raw extensions to separate to references, which would basically make this no longer necessary. So it really just depends on timing.
Yeah.
Well, I will leave this open for Jason for the time being to put the comment in, and then from there we can look at the other issue. Need a GitHub label for this data model area API. Owner reference is not set on closed. Did we triage this already?
It was after,
Okay.
yeah, it was closed recently.
Decide how fault availability zones should be represented. I don't think we can do that in this cycle. That doesn't even exist across providers in the same way. Anyone disagree? Just leave it there.
Works for me.
I'm going to turn this to backlog. Anyone disagree with that one? Silence is acceptance. Fail machine edits for unsupported. Fail machine edits for unsupported edits. So part of this looked like schema validation.
I think this is probably editing the provider spec.
Yeah, this is, I make some change to the machine, like in the provider spec, I change the instance type, I change the CPU, RAM, whatever, and nothing happens. So this is about immutability. So we basically need like a validating webhook, most likely, that says there are lots of fields in the machine that don't support updates.
Do we have, does anyone know the state of CRDs with webhook validation yet?
It works.
Yeah, it's just a type of admission webhook.
Yeah.
Are we going to enable and have a container that we will create as part of it?
I believe it requires a certificate for the server serving the admission webhook.
QBuilder handles that.
Okay.
So does somebody want to work on this? I think this is worthy of, if we're going to modify the API.
We might want to wait for the next version of QBuilder, though, which is also matching the next version of controller runtime, which has like a lot of changes regarding webhooks.
What's the time frame?
Do not, like the controller runtime just hit beta like a few weeks ago.
Would it be useful to make an issue to track upgrading controller runtime? I'm very interested in that work and would like a place to track it.
I think that's a great idea, and I think you should cross-link this issue.
Yeah, okay, sounds good to me.
As a result, you've been assigned.
That's fine.
Chuck, are you going to create that issue?
Yeah, I'm going to create that issue.
Thank you.
I will put this on the milestone for now, and because it's long-term important, we may punt it out based upon the state of what you find.
I will note, looking at the release notes for the beta for controller runtime, automatic certificate generation for webhooks has been removed, and webhooks will no longer self-register. Use controller tools to generate a webhook config, and use something like Cert Manager to generate your certs if you don't already have a solution. The next release of QBuilder will support this out of the box.
Wait.
Yep.
Anyone have an idea for time frame for next release of QBuilder?
Well, the alpha is out right now, and it's probably pending stability of controller tools and controller runtime.
Okay. Well, I'll leave this open for the time being. We can always punt if you need to. I think that's pretty important, though. Oh, man, refresh takes me to the top. Ability to define. Ability to define a set of labels, annotations, and taints to be created on a newly created K8's nodes.
Yeah, this has had some revived discussion lately around, there's also a link to a Google Doc for a proposal down below in one of the comments. And so some people are asking for initial values for these things. Other people are asking for full-on additive reconciliation.
So you can't reconcile taints. It's a one-time shot. That was even like a security problem, right? And we have the ability to do initial deployment through all the plumbing of kubeadm. So you can do everything you need to do today through kubeadm, but I don't know if it's plumbed through properly in a way that people like through Cluster API.
So
Does QBuilder handle annotations now? I thought it was just the labels and the taints.
you mean CubeADM?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
You can do whatever you want to do. So like it's got the plumbing for everything. So if you want to annotate a node, you can specify whatever you want. So it's got the plumbing is very raw though. And we even do that as part of initial Bootstrap for, we put in a CRI information as an annotation into the nodes on the initial Bootstrap.
So the comments I added to this earlier today were, one, do we want to come up with a way that any, like regardless of Bootstrap tool, regardless of infrastructure, you can specify in one place in the machine spec, these are the labels, these are the annotations that I want for my node, and I can be confident that they will get set whether I'm using CubeADM or not. And so that's one question. The other is, do we reconcile beyond the initial setting of these values?
The answer, reconcile beyond initial setting, has to be no.
Right. And so maybe instead of having these be fields in the machine, these can be part of the Bootstrap config.
Ooh,
They certainly can, but then you don't necessarily get the same behavior across different Bootstrap providers. Like I have no problem saying, yeah, we'll support this in the CubeADM Bootstrap provider, and if you're using something else, hopefully it does too.
That's the case for anything in the Bootstrap config though, right?
Yes. I mean, the Bootstrap config is 100% provider dependent and provider specified. So what I'm suggesting as a possibility for discussion, and not necessarily in favor of, is adding some controller logic to Cluster API itself to go and modify, do a one-time modification of a node as soon as it comes up to set labels and annotations.
Guys, I was trying to recall because I am sure that something like this is done in Gardener project. It sounds for a presentation in the community. I think it was Hadik who was working on this, so probably I can ping him. And because I remember something about updating the labels and things in nodes, and the problem that you can add, but later you have the problem you remove. I mean, it's like a problematic. It creates some very tricky situation of reconciliation. So probably I can ask him.
Well, his proposal is linked in this issue, and Tim is saying setting these values is a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Well, you can. It's not a. So you have to be super careful in that you should initially set the values, especially for taints and labels, and an administrator, high-level administrative access can do that too as well. But building it into automation, especially rectification for automation, is a huge security constraint, right? So the reason why we were not allowed to in CubeADM was because there were super big security holes that couldn't be plugged, right? So they're only allowed to be modified by an administrator or by initial Bootstrap concerns.
Are you talking about taints?
Both taints and labels, because you can do special things with taints and labels. I
mean, you can kube control patch or update.
Yeah, but you have to be an administrator to do that, right?
Sure.
So
but
the
cluster API generally has root on target clusters.
But take a step back. The purpose of Cluster API is to bootstrap, update, not necessarily do management. Right? Management should be, I think, out of scope because there's a whole rubric of ideas that could be applied in a fractal pattern of how you do management.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for it. I agree with you, Tim. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
All right, I'm giving this to Andy.
Oh, so I get to be the bad guy to say no.
Well, I think pushing the initial constraints into the bootstrap seems totally legit and fair. And if a person wants to create a separate controller that does this from a management perspective, not cluster API perspective, that's totally up to them.
Yeah, so we'll implement the ability to set initial labels and taints in the kubeadm Bootstrap controller. I don't think there's anything you can do with annotations in kubeadm right now. So
not without plumbing it through as raw arguments.
Is there actually a user story that we have for setting annotations on a node?
I don't have one.
I wouldn't. So the way that I would view this is as part of implementing the kubeadm Bootstrapper, make sure that this functionality is in there for labels and taints. And if you need to set some annotations on your node, go do that after the node comes up.
So I stopped for a second. There are conditions for doing annotation on a node, but not during initial Bootstrap. Usually there's a separate daemon set pod that gets deployed that annotates the node for doing things like if I have specialty hardware and I want to do pattern matching for that specialty hardware, right? Like maybe say I have a nuclear missile attached to my machine and I want to be able to launch that missile, then I'd annotate the node that way.
All right,
But
well,
not-
I'm going to comment as to what our plans are, and we'll see what people say.
And why don't I'll back you up here. So I'm going to unmask the cluster API repository from my filter bot. So support IP machines, IP configuration for machines. This should be plumbed through. If you set it on your node, what is? Wait, so is he doing like a custom? So this seems very tailored. Do folks have like, the thing that I find a little bit weird about this is a lot of people manage their machines through machine deployments. If you have specific IP addresses, it means you're explicitly managing your machines separately, which isn't bad. And you could plumb through the configuration through kubeadm to do this.
We might want to check with Siddharth or Andrew about this.
Do we want to address this, at least give it like another pass to see if it's worthy, if we have time to do it? I don't think this is high priority, in my opinion. Or should you just leave it at next?
I don't have
I would
enough
just leave it.
information.
I would just leave it for next for now. This requires a lot of changes in the controllers.
I'm going to say help wanted because it's clear that Siddharth has not worked on this. Right?
Yeah, the biggest problem I have with this one is most like actual cloud providers, you won't even be able to do this.
This is primarily for things like OpenStack.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to close that one. Remote node references. You're already working on this, right?
Yeah, we can skip over.
Yes, I think this is going to be close soon.
All right. Cluster validation when node ref is missing. Is that also part of that?
Yeah, this will be fixed by that as well.
Make machine set extensible in a similar way that cluster machines are. Add provider spec to machine set. Oh, I see what they're going to do in DCUS.
This is also something that's come up from both AWS and the Azure folks as well.
It sounds like a reasonable request. I don't know if we're going to have time to accomplish it in this cycle.
Some of the Azure folks have already committed to starting to work up a proposal for this. So
should
How
we
does
leave it?
this relate with the bootstrap like split that we gonna bring into machine sets, for example? Given that we're templating and the infrastructure provider is outside, then we wouldn't disallow this, right? Like,
so one of the things that we've talked about, and this came up during a conversation at KubeCon, is potentially not extending machine sets, but offering a similar abstraction to machine sets that would work specifically around scale groups.
I see.
Although I think, Tim, the last time you and I chatted about that, you were not in favor of having a sibling machine set CRD that distinguished like one for auto scaling groups or VMSSs or whatever, and then another one that's machine based. Am I recalling that correctly?
I don't recall. I do know that auto scaling groups is a very thorny, weird thing of how we're going to make that work. Is there a reference of who would actually from the Azure group that would be working on this at all?
I can track it down. They're assigned on an issue that's in the Azure provider repo, and I'll make the linking.
I put it in this milestone with long-term importance so we can punt. Unable to distinguish between nil versus empty machine tates. That seems like a bug.
Yeah, the history on this one was, I think it had to do with omit empty. And there was an omit empty that should not have been there. So I think Daniel had a PR to fix this, and we were just waiting for V1 Alpha 2 to merge it.
V1 Beta 2. Yeah, and V1 Beta 2 is done for 115. So it's
CAPI V1 Alpha 2.
Oh, I thought this was related to plumbing all the way through to kubeadm right here. There's I believe kubeadm has a similar issue with some API. So if it's plumbed through on our side, we can plumb it all the way through on this side. So I think this is worthy to fix. I'm sure Daniel will be happy.
There is a PR up, right?
Hold on.
Yeah, so there's a PR to modify V1 Alpha, CAPI V1 Alpha 1 to get rid of this omit empty tag, which was open basically right before we cut V1 Alpha 1, and it says, hey, let's wait to merge this until we've released it. So I'm actually curious, in V1 Alpha 2, do we still want to have the taints represented on the machine spec? I realize this is a different question, but it's very similar to the labels and annotations we were just talking about. Like it's up to some external provider to use them. So maybe we just make this part of the kubeadm bootstrap provider and take the taints off the machine spec. I don't know.
I would be +1 on that.
Because I mean, you don't know, looking at a given machine, if the infrastructure provider you've chosen, which currently is infrastructure and bootstrapping provider for V1 Alpha 1, you have no idea if those taints are going to be applied or not. Because not all providers look at them.
Do you want to look into this, Andy, or do you want to federate that out to someone else?
I will open up another. I'll either open up another issue or find some way to have a discussion about should we remove taints from machine spec.
Okay. I will leave this here. Disassociate Kubernetes from machines. Is that a straight up no?
Nope. I mean, yes.
I'll be the, yeah, so the one thing I want to, and I said that in the comment that I put inside of your doc. Where is it here? One second here. Why don't I send this to me and I can, this is a, I'll read through this one and I'll make a statement in detail. We're not creating Terraform, is the short answer. What are the common fields across providers? That seems thorny. Do we want to tackle something like this?
I remember the discussion, and I think that this mostly superseded by all the discussion we had in the data model. I mean, it's like it was a first attempt to try to change the data model and try to find some common elements. I don't believe this is actually relevant. I mean, aligned with what we have been discussing.
Other thoughts?
I find it really hard to like try to like find common fields like before actually seeing what V1 Alpha 2 looks like. So I would be in favor of like closing this at some point.
Well, why don't we leave it as backlog for at least the time being, so we get V1 Alpha 2 out the door, and revisit one last time to see if there's any commonality in some aspects of the spec. Does that seem like a fair approach? Or do you want to like close it now?
I think it's good to keep it open because this is something that we're going to have to attempt to reevaluate later on anyway.
I just don't want to create Delta Cloud. Been there, done that. All right, status fields. I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but for status.
Yeah. I think for machines, having a well-defined state machine or having state machines for different objects is highly, highly, highly useful. But so the status would be, current state transitions, where the condition would vary based upon provider. Externalize provider specific specs and status into separate CRDs.
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes ago, that we're definitely doing this for machines. We may do it for cluster, and Pablo was going to work on a proposal for cluster.
Oh, did I assign this to myself? I don't think it's critical urgent. Is it critical urgent?
I mean, it goes along with the machine states and bootstrapping proposal. So that's our P0, right?
Okay, that's fair. It's all you. You got this. Enable support for different Kubernetes distributions. That's kind of part of the current as part of the current milestone.
This is, we want a Bootstrap provider that works across different infrastructure providers.
Does somebody want to close this when linked to the current proposal? Or does somebody want to take triaging this one and see if we can close it with the current proposal?
Yeah, I'll do it, Tim. 853.
Standardized immutable cluster.
Yeah, so I put a comment at the bottom of this one, which I think is relevant.
I think we can just leave it open. Let's at least try, we'll leave it in a weird state, not assigned, to figure out where we're at in this cycle. I think we could probably just close this. I don't even know if I want to put help wanted on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just yet another way to say we need image stamping and Bootstrap providers.
Should we just close it?
I don't know. I mean, it's the same. To me, it's like half of the equation for 853, which was the one right before this about managing different Kubernetes distributions. So we could open one issue that says we want Bootstrap and infrastructure providers to be separate, and then just link all of these to that and close these. Or we could just keep all of these open until the proposal is accepted and we get stuff coded and V1 Alpha 2 is closer to being ready. Whatever makes sense.
I don't have strong opinions. I'll just leave it open in its priority backlog for the milestone, and we can close it later on, I guess, for a time.
Maybe, but by the time we get this discussion, having a link to this kind of umbrella issue that you mentioned makes sense, because later they can be like use cases. We can pick from, say, why we need that separation is because of these and these use cases. So I think it could be valuable to leave them open and but have an umbrella as Andy mentioned or suggested.
Control plane, expose cluster control plane knobs. Are we not going to do this now for this cycle?
This will show up in the Kubidium Bootstrapper.
Who's going to be taking a role in doing the Bootstrap stuff?
I think this can be closed in Cluster API though, if the Kubernetes Bootstrapper goes outside.
I think I had volunteered at some point for this work.
Okay. Machine stateful set for HA control plane.
This is essentially, we want to have a control plane data type and controller and for lifecycle. Definitely not for V1 Alpha 2, but you know, we want to have proposals for this.
All right, I'll leave it frozen and untouched. Support managed Kubernetes. I don't think that's going to happen this cycle.
Yeah, same answer as the previous one.
testing, conformance testing. Are we actually going to be able to get to this in this cycle? There's a bunch of work upstream that I need to fix to make vendoring framework stuff a lot cleaner.
So the complication here is that this also talks about including the cloud providers, which...
Well, if we have the test suite, we can eliminate that and just say, like, if we have the test suite, cloud providers need to pass the test suite in order for them to be considered conformant. Do we want to start this work? This is a good thing for other people who want to get engaged to help define what the API semantics should be like and you know, get the verification in place. I think this is a great thing for new people to get involved in. Working from the outside in is a good idea. I don't know if I consider it backlog as long-term. It's a lot of work. It needs a lot of people. Anybody want to stand up? I saw you go mute.
That's because my kids are in the background.
Right. Good excuse. I'll say that too. All right. I'll leave it as help wanted. If there are people that want to step up, this is a great way to for new folks to get engaged. And I'll try to publicize this inside of the main meeting.
Yeah. So I totally think it would be awesome for new people to try and jump in here, but we need to be able to help them to enable them, because just coming to this issue, which has no description, is not really super welcoming.
That's a fair statement. I do agree that we need to do a better job, and maybe I can rewrite this one. I'll assign it to myself, and then I'll leave it as help wanted. All right. Come on, Google. Script CIS should fail, Basil. What?
Yeah, so Liz assigned that to herself a while ago. I just added a comment to check in and see if she's made any progress.
All right, I'm bumped into this milestone. She has it as active, so. CI coverage for ARM. Backlog. I don't unless we actually we don't actually have inside of test infra that I'm aware of without federated testing. You have federated testing to be able to push results, but we don't actually have.
Look at that comment.
We've actually been granted access from the Open Lab team for ARM hardware.
Do we want to own this work? Do you want to own this work though?
I mean, I don't mind kicking off the initial part of it.
Okay. I would hope that a stakeholder that, you know, like Packet, for example, would maybe step up and do some of this work. PowerPC, same thing. Open Lab.
No, PowerPC is going to be IBM.
This is
Same
also
with
better.
390X.
Yeah. Are they actually going to do the work though? May 7th. So that was recent.
From the discussions that we had at KubeCon, yes, they plan on doing the work.
Why don't I leave this one as help wanted? All right, I'm still going to leave it as next because it's not a priority for the milestone. I don't see it as that unless IBM wants to like commit to executing on it. Health and status. Define health check strategy for machine set.
This might be blocked on Node-REF.
Yeah, I think big picture it's blocked on Node-REF for sure.
I'll leave it as next and ask to evaluate. Dump logs from Minikube before SSD. It's cluster cuddle. By the way, let me take a look here for a second just while we're doing this. Yeah, so it looks like it's updated. So I talked with Aaron, and he set up the syncing so that it should automatically have synced all the labels properly so that they're color matching too as well across repositories. Expose cluster machine events and cluster cuddle, that's also me. We have a fun time. Status of cluster is not easy to find. We're not going to change so we really need a state machine for the entirety of a cluster. Like, you know how we're sort of defining the states for machines, we really need a well-defined state machine for what the state of the cluster is.
I think we also need to figure out what does cluster look like going forward. Does it stay how it looks? Does it get split up? Also, I have to run, so I will see you all later. Thank you.
Should we call it for today?
Yeah.
I think so.
All right. We'll call it for today. I will rip through all the cluster cuddle stuff and get that done before the next one. Maybe what's a good time for folks to, if folks want to reconvene? Should we do one more week on Friday, or just to involve broader people and do more PSAs? This time I'll send out the meeting invite properly.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. I will do that, and I'll try to get in larger chunks so we can just like finish this. All right. With that,
Cool.
I will stop sharing my screen. Hope everyone has a fun weekend. Enjoy your time. Watch Star Wars. All right. That's going to be like the theme every Friday. Take care.
Bye.
All right.